There's a scene in Game of Thrones that most people watch as if it were simply two characters having an interesting conversation. A clever servant girl and a bored warlord, killing time while Harrenhal rots around them. And most of the audience takes it at face value, appreciates the sharp dialogue, admires the chemistry between the actors, and moves on thinking they understood what they saw. But they didn't. Because if you pay attention to the way Tywin Lannister looks at Arya, not at what he says, but at the calculated silence beneath every word, you realize there is nothing casual about any of it. There's nothing Tywin Lannister does by accident. Every pause, every seemingly innocent question, every moment he looks away and looks back, all of it is observation, assessment. A man who spent his entire life reading people like war documents was doing exactly that in those conversations. And when you understand what was truly happening in those scenes, what each of them knew, what each of them pretended not to know, and why neither one gave themselves away until the very end, the entire series gains a layer that changes how you see every character. What looked like a narrative intermission was in fact one of the most complex relationships Game of Thrones ever built.
The first thing we need to understand about Tywin Lannister is this: he was not simply intelligent. Intelligence is common in Westeros. There were intelligent men in every court, every castle, every council. What set Tywin apart was not the speed of thought, it was the precision of his human reading. He understood motivations, he understood what people wanted to hide, and he understood above all else that real power does not lie with whoever shouts the loudest, but with whoever knows the most about everyone around them. He transformed the Lannisters from a wealthy family into a dynasty of power because he understood before any other lord of his generation that the words people choose to reveal are always less important than the ones they work to conceal. Every concession he made was calculated. Every alliance carried an invisible price. Every conversation was an information field he mined with surgical patience. So when a girl appears at Harrenhal, claiming her name is Nan, speaking with the diction of someone educated, holding the gaze of the most dangerous lord in Westeros without blinking, Tywin didn't need much time to know she was no servant. The question was never whether he noticed. The question was what he decided to do with that perception. The real question is not whether he knew she was lying. That he knew from the very first day, with a certainty that required no confirmation. The question is, how far did that knowledge go? How deep did his understanding reach? The more dramatic version claims that Tywin recognized Arya Stark by name and by face, that he knew exactly who he was dealing with, daughter of Ned Stark, a strategic piece of the highest value. That version is seductive, but it requires that Tywin had met Arya in person before, that he retained a visual memory of a child he had likely never encountered, and that he chose an inexplicably generous silence by the standards of the character. There is a subtler version, and perhaps a more unsettling one, that fits better with who Tywin is. He knew there was noble blood behind those eyes. He knew she was the daughter of some lord, someone important enough to have been educated with maps, history, and posture. And he chose, deliberately, not to investigate further, because knowing less sometimes is a strategic advantage, and Tywin Lannister understood that advantage better than any living man in Westeros. If you were to catalog the signs Tywin receives during the weeks Arya spends as his cupbearer, the list runs longer than the series makes explicit, because the series trusts you to notice on your own. She reads. In an era when the overwhelming majority of peasants couldn't distinguish one letter from another, she picks up a map and processes it like someone raised with maps from the time she learned to walk. She doesn't merely recognize the symbols, she understands their strategic implications. She answers historical questions about kings and conquests with an accuracy that goes far beyond a servant's curiosity. The history she knows is the kind taught in noble household classrooms, not the kind overheard in taverns. And there is the posture, a certain instinctive refusal to submit completely, impossible to learn over a lifetime of servitude. It is not arrogance, It is structure, a spine that does not bend the way servants' spines bend. You are born with it, or you are not. Tywin notices everything, every detail, and instead of dismissing her, formally investigating or torturing her to extract the truth, he keeps her close. In Tywin Lannister, carelessness simply does not exist as a category. Consider the historical moment Tywin finds himself in. He is at Harrenhal, a castle of ill fortune that has already destroyed everyone who tried to use it. The war is spreading across fronts he does not fully control. Robb Stark is winning battles he should not be winning. Internally, he is surrounded by captains who obey out of fear, by allies he measures in probability of betrayal, by an environment where reliable information is scarce and human judgment is worth more than gold. In a situation like that, what you want at your side is not a loyal servant. Loyalty can be bought, produced, manufactured. What you want is someone intelligent, someone who understands what is at stake without needing it explained. Someone whose presence forces you to articulate your thoughts with greater clarity because you know there is a mind on the other side that will genuinely process what you say. Because Tywin Lannister, as much as he would never have admitted it, likely not even to himself, was the kind of man who thought more clearly when there was someone worthy in the room. Cersei was calculating and emotional in equal measure. Jaime was brilliant but indifferent to genuine strategy. Tyrion was the most capable of the three, and Tywin could never fully bring himself to accept that. Arya, without realizing it, was being that someone, and he knew it.
And here lies the central paradox of this relationship, the point where Tywin's logic encounters something he had not planned for. The more he valued her, the less he wanted to know who she was. Not valued in any sentimental sense. Tywin was not given to sentimentality, but there was a form of intellectual appreciation, almost professional, for the way she operated. She did not allow herself to be intimidated. She thought before answering. She knew when to stay silent and when to risk a line that went beyond what a servant should say. And she did all of it with a naturalness that only comes from years of formation she didn't even realize she had received. But if he confirmed the full name behind that face, if he knew he had an enemy lord's daughter serving wine at his table, he would be forced to act. A Lannister cannot simply overlook a strategic piece of that magnitude. The politics, the protocol, the very logic of power that Tywin had spent his entire life defending would demand a response. Imprison her, use her as a bargaining chip, or eliminate her as a variable too inconvenient to leave loose. None of those options served him in that moment. So, he chose the only alternative his pragmatism could find, knowing enough to keep the situation useful, but not enough to be forced into action.
There is a layer to this relationship that the series only grazes, almost like a whisper between the lines, yet it changes the texture of everything you see. Arya reminded Tywin of Cersei, not physically, but in that specific energy of someone who refuses to accept the role the world insists on offering them. Cersei was born into a family of power and spent her entire life being told that her gender limited what she could become. And she never fully accepted that, but she never truly broke free either. She remained in that anguishing space between the ambition she carried and the box she was placed inside. Tywin put her in that box, and he knew it. And the cost of that, the cost of having turned his most capable child into a woman who used manipulation as a substitute for real power, was deposited somewhere he never opened. In Arya, there was something that had not yet been deformed, an intact, raw stubbornness. And perhaps part of Tywin recognized that with something close to respect. Not the kind he would ever show. The silent kind, buried deep, that exists in men built upon control when they encounter someone who simply cannot be controlled.
And then Tywin departs. Robb Stark is advancing. The war demands his presence on another front, and Harrenhal must be left behind. He names the mountain as Castellan, organizes the rear guard, and leaves. Arya stays. And only after that, with Tywin already off the board, does she find her window to escape. But think about what happens immediately before that departure. Tywin spends weeks with a girl he clearly knows is not what she claims to be. He perceives the posture, the diction, the knowledge, the gaze. He has every tool needed to ask a simple question before leaving. Who are you really? One question, one order, that would have been enough. He doesn't. He leaves without investigating, and he leaves this girl of noble blood who had stimulated him intellectually more than most of his generals under the brutal command of the Mountain in a collapsing castle, without even ensuring that anyone knew what she was worth. This is not distraction. Tywin does not get distracted. It is the same logic as before. Formally investigating would require acting on the answer, and he did not want to be forced to act. So he left with the question still in his mouth and let her go without ever having needed to say that he knew.
The entire series is full of characters who define themselves through the moments they act. Ned Stark, who cannot lie even when the lie would save his life. Cersei, who burns what she cannot control. The active, dramatic, irreversible choices. Those are the ones the narrative illuminates. But sometimes what a character reveals about themselves is not found in what they do. It is found in exactly what they decide not to do. And in the gap between what they could have done, what the logic of power demanded, and what they silently chose to ignore, you find something truer than any dialogue could deliver. Tywin Lannister saw a girl of noble blood pretending to be a servant, saw her with the clarity of someone who spent a lifetime decoding people, understood that there was a story behind that invented name, a house, a father, a conflict that certainly crossed his own, and still he turned the page. Not out of weakness, not out of distraction, but because there was, buried far too deep to admit, perhaps far too deep for even him to recognize, something that resembled respect for someone who played the game as well as he did. The most dangerous lion in Westeros, and he let the wolf go.